You're listening to Travel Tales with Virgil.
But if you change your environment and end up in Bangkok or Goa or Saigon or New York, I mean, what a change is that? Every part of your five senses is going to be completely stimulated. What you see, the smell of the place, the taste of the food, the feel, the noise of a different language and the sound of a different city. We've all been there and seen that. And I think the older I get, the more precious it is as an act of personal renaissance, which is rebirth.
Hi, I'm Fergal O'Keefe, and you just heard the voice of my wonderful guest today, Kevin Flanagan, from the brilliant travel podcast, The Top Travel Destinations with Kevin Flanagan, which I highly recommend. Kevin is a travel writer for the Sunday Independent, best-selling author and documentary maker, actor and ballet dancer. So he's a true Renaissance man. But what really shines through this episode as we meander around the world is Kevin's real passion for travel. I would call this my most travelly episode yet, if you know what I mean. When I travel, it is much more than just the geographic location that brings a place to life. It's the history of a place, the culture, the food, the drink, the fun and the sun. It's the architecture and the people. Kevin gets that. So if you like this podcast, you're going to love this episode with Kevin now. Kevin, you're very welcome to the podcast. Great to see you.
Oh, Fergal, it's such a pleasure. I'm such a big fan of your podcast, and I'm following in the footsteps of that wonderful cyclist, and then of course the man that joined the Foreign Legion. So I'm delighted to be here with you, because you really know how to milk a story out of people, and yes, it's great.
Can I just say, like, your podcast, The Top Travel Destinations with Kevin Flanagan, I came across it and immediately I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It's because I do a lot, like I do a lot of walking every day down by the river, and it's just perfect for that. And I feel like you're a kindred spirit, actually, because every episode I'm listening to, like, you just seem to be interested in, for instance, you love Luan Prabang, you talk about doing a thing with U2, and it's all the topics, even the latest one talking about school tours. And it was like, I just, it brought me back. And I think that's what's great. It brought me back to my school tour. And maybe that possibly was the thing that got me into travel, was that, I think I was in sixth class in primary school, went to London. And then in first year of secondary school, I went to Paris. And those two trips are the things that gave me that fear of, because you imagine being in sixth class in primary school and being in London, and then first year, so 12, 13, and kind of half being scared. And I still get that feeling, and I love that feeling of arriving in a new place and a little bit worried and a little bit apprehensive, because that's the adrenaline I get from travel, which I love.
Yeah. But well, it goes back to the saying, doesn't it? What's the difference between being in a rut and being in the grave? It's about 4 foot, So there is inertia to travel, and there is inertia. Particularly, I find, because I'm older now, and people definitely say, "Oh, I've stopped traveling since COVID and all of that." And I think that's just the time when you should travel, because there is a lot of studies that show that travel is very good for your health. It's very good for your emotional and mental health, and also your horizons. Like as a 70-year-old now, I find I'm actually coming more alive, and some of the traveling I've done, like to Luan, to Laos and to Vietnam earlier this year for a month nearly, was life enhancing. And just to go and see, what I grew up during the Vietnam War. It was the first TV war, and to hear about the Tet Offensive and Da Nang and Saigon. And I had some incredibly dodgy, quite dangerous experiences in Saigon, where I took sort of life and limb in hands to find the dark hot building that the CIA, where the last chop landed to take people off, and going on a scooter ride Saigon. You definitely take your life in your hands, but it's exhilarating. We're all going to die one way or another anyway, so let's live before we die. That would be a mantra.
Anytime I'm away, and even recently, actually a few weeks ago, I was in Trevena skiing, but I was about to go on a cable car, and the horn went up, and they said no more, and I was bulling because I wanted to get on. The guy put across the rope, and then I looked up, and actually, if you type it in, Cervenia or Trevena chairlift, it was on Sky, like the lifts were, the chairs were like swinging with people falling out of them. And I literally was the last person. I was bullying because I wanted to go up. And even when they wouldn't let me up on that chair, I went up on another one shorter. And as I was going up it, I could see the chairs swinging. But all I was thinking was, God, if I was on that, it would have made a great story. And you know what I mean? Like, so when I'm ever traveling
Absolutely.
and something like
Absolutely. Yeah.
mishap happens, I'm always going, they're nearly always the best parts of the trip.
Yes. Yeah. As if you survive. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you don't, there's some way to go, you know.
It is some way to go. Yeah.
So
That
you're,
was the old home.
could you tell people a little bit about yourself then? Like your travel editor, Renaissance man.
But I've done a lot. I don't know, Fergal. It was weird because I was always able to do lots of different things. But I started off my career as an art historian. I went to the Courtauld Institute, which is the place to go to study art. Then I turned myself into a ballet dancer because that's what I always wanted to be. You can see on my
Yeah.
back wall pictures of Nureyev. I worked with Nureyev, and um, and I've written a couple of best-selling books. I've made some documentaries and film. I still do acting. I love all of that stuff. I'm a good grandparent. I think I look after my two grandkids. But the travel has always been a sort of and podcasting seems to bring all of the strands together because as a podcaster you act, you have to remember lines, you have to perform, you have to share a script, you have to create your little mini story like Ernest Hemingway. You have to really create something, and then you have to engage an audience, and then the audience. And now the great thing, as you know, is as an established podcast, the data doesn't lie, so you know who listened, when they listened, when they turned off. And it's very interesting. The last, you kindly mentioned that trip I did with the school trip. When you look at podcasts, a lot of people turn off within the first 15 20 minutes. There's quite a fall off rate, but everybody listened to that podcast till the end, which is a first actually. And it's fascinating to get such rich data back. Terrifying, because in the newspaper where I've been working with as doing the travel news for the Sunday Independent, and you'd have these figures, like newspapers, they print so many copies and then you multiply that by so many because there would be people reading in a household. But now it's scary, the diagnostics you get, but it's great because when you're doing a good job.
Were you always into travel? Like you were talking about that about from your school trip, but were you kind of always going in that direction of writing about travel?
Well, I not so much writing about travel, but experiencing travel, and I had some, big moments, the school trip away, and then I did my art history degree, and I went with my very good friend Paul, in London, where I was brought up, and that was, following the Renaissance giants in Florence and Venice and Rome, Michelangelo, and I specialized in the 15th century Venice, and then onwards when my son was born, one of the big things was taking him to London first, and then I took him on this wonderful trip to New York when he was 11 or 12 to see the World Cup with Jack Charlton's team, and I've had the means to travel, which is great, and I think we're in I think it's very easy to underestimate the privilege we have of traveling, because we can get on a Ryanair flight, get on a Aer Lingus flight, get on an Emirates flight, and be the other side of the world for not a huge amount of money still, even with energy crisis, and that will totally change your life. There's nothing like, people take drugs to change their mood and alcohol to change their mood. But if you change your environment and end up in Bangkok or Goa or Saigon or New York, what a change is that? Every part of your five senses is going to be completely stimulated. What you see, the smell of the place, the taste of the food, the feel, the noise of a different language and the sound of a different city. We've all been there and seen that. And I think it is, the older I get, the more precious it is as an act of personal renaissance, which is rebirth.
That's interesting. I remember like when I was traveling, I spent 2 years traveling at the end of the 90s around the world, and we'd meet couples that were doing similar things, but they might have been in their 70s. And I remember going, gosh, I want to be like those. As you get older, you could maybe become less adventurous. I'm sure you notice that with friends, maybe.
Yes.
But the key is to force yourself to go, isn't it?
Well, I think the thing is that, firstly, as you do get older, you are going to encounter health problems. Now, I haven't encountered health problems yet, but I do mind myself and I work out every day. And since I was a professional dancer, I've always worked out every day. I've never let that slip. So that's one thing. But I think if you can keep, while you're still hale and hearty, or every study I know says that if you stimulate yourself, challenge yourself, it goes back to the flow, the idea of flow. You only get into flow when you're challenged. So like if you ski a particularly difficult slope, you're not going to be looking at your phone. You're not going to be distracted because you'll die. So it's about the challenge. It's about giving yourself. And when you go to places like Auschwitz, and I found that I've gravitated to, there's a term for it, which maybe we'll discuss, which is called dark tourism. And that's not about the occult, though there could be occult powers involved in some of these places because they're certainly quite satanic. But there is this sense of, what humans can do to one another. And there's two places that in particular that it shook me and my belief systems to the core. And that was going to Auschwitz. And then just last year, going to Cambodia and the killing fields. And it's very bizarre, but going to the killing fields, Auschwitz is an industrial scale of killing. And the killing fields are a personal, where they didn't have guns. So they would have to finish you off after torturing pretty much everybody who ended up on the wrong side of the Khmer Rouge. They'd finish you off with an agricultural implement, a hoe or a bamboo or a hammer. And when you actually go to the Genocide Museum just outside of Phnom Penh, about 20 minutes taxi drive outside Phnom Penh, they warn you, because it was all a shallow grave, without becoming too graphic. They were shallow graves. So you will see, when there's the monsoon rains, you will see bits of garment, even bits of bone come out, and you're asked to respectfully point those out so they can be buried properly, or given the right. And there's nothing like that. Or going to S21, which is in the heart of Phnom Penh, which is, have you been to S21?
Yeah.
But then you know what I'm saying. No documentary, no book, no travelogue is going to ever replace walking into a school like my grandson Kuba goes to, which has been transformed into a dark satanic mill, as Blake described certain things. And and it just shows, because they're no different to me and you. So the fact that I wear glasses, you wear glasses, would have been enough for you to have been murdered in this horrible manner because you were educated. And I think there's something deeply troubling about that, but that's us, and turn on the news and you'll see us. And then the other side of the coin is, take a bus up to Angkor Siam Reap, which is 8 hours roughly by coach from Phnom Penh. And then you come to the most wonderful place on the planet, which is, for me, which is Angkor Wat, which is this incredible. I mean, I get goosebumps when I just think about it.
I know.
To arrive at this huge temple complex, which was lost in the jungle and rediscovered by this French archaeologist who was a bit like Indiana Jones, and to see the majesty, and right at the very top, and it's so hot and the jungle is so humid, and you make your pilgrimage, and it takes hours to climb to the very top, and at the very top is the Buddha that the same King Solomon 1,000 years ago knelt before, and you can kneel there and breathe in the smells of the incense and breathe in the smells and the sounds of the forest and touch the Buddha. And, depending on your view of life, I found that very reaffirming, because when I actually got to the top of it, was just 3 days after I'd been in the killing fields, and I had no idea how horrifying, how I couldn't process it as a human being. But
Exactly.
then going to this place and getting this sort of grace of meeting the Buddha, metaphorically or in actuality, I mean, it doesn't matter. It worked.
Do you know what's funny? When I think of Cambodia, I actually think of Angkor Wat as a separate. When you said there it went up to,
Yeah.
I think of them as separate countries, because when I was down, in Phnom Penh and around, I just kind of really struggled after going to the killing fields, and every kind of local I met, I was sort of talking to them. And so it's so recent that even
Yes.
young people have a
Yeah.
memory of it. But I found it
Yeah.
very hard, um, dealing with that. And so I do think of Siem Reap nearly as a separate place. It's
Yeah.
funny.
Yes.
And maybe a
Yes.
bit of that when I went to Dachau. I remember I spent a summer in Munich working, and went out to Dachau. Couldn't convince my mates to go. It was a summer's day, boiling hot. So I went there, and I was kind of walking around there in the days as well. But I find then afterwards, it's kind of hard to, you're kind of looking at everybody, because you're connecting that time with seeing people, maybe even older people, it's very hard to process this, isn't it?
It's
It's
very hard
so
to process.
powerful when you go to
Yes.
somewhere like that.
Yes. But it's real, because
Hmm.
it does speak of the human condition. And so it challenges you to say, well, like, it's not all about TikTok, and it's not all about Instagram, and it's not all about, my new car. I don't want to sound cliched, but I always come back from those sort of trips. You've reconfigured yourself, your soul or your mind, and you really think about things. We do this to each other,
Yeah.
and there's a great lesson there, and then the other thing is to sort of, we also can spread a little bit of goodness by, how we treat people and how we interact, and how we find
Exactly.
meaning in our lives. And I think, that travel can really be useful for that.
Hmm. And do you think you travel differently than, a non-travel industry person? Like, are you always looking at places and making notes mentally in your head, or how do you travel?
I, I don't know. I think a lot of that's unconscious.
Yeah.
Like, I go to art galleries and I look at art in a certain way. I'm a trained art historian, and I did a degree in it anyway. So I always have had an interest in that, and I would bring the kids to the gallery. I'm just naturally interested. I find it interesting, like I find snooker interesting or golf interesting. I actually just find it interesting, and I find travel exactly the same. I find I just I just love that sense. I mean, it's like Christmas, getting on a plane, and if you're lucky enough to get, upgraded, you've got a glass of champagne and you're going off on the, even if you're not upgraded, wherever you're going somewhere. And even having a sip of water and on a plane, a tube 30,000 feet in the air, like, it's mad. It's really mad. And I think wonder, Coleridge, the English poet, said, like, childlike wonder is a great thing, and that's, touched by genius. And I think, if to retain childlike wonder is means you don't get old. And I think I
Yeah.
want to keep the old man out. I've never felt like an old man, but even you can be an old man, but you don't have to necessarily,
Of course.
channel that. You can still, while you've got your
Of
fact,
course.
you can still, just just the whole thing of going to Saigon, which was only a couple of months ago, was just so fascinating, because, number one, I knew everywhere from growing up. I'd been one of the demonstrators against the Vietnam War. I'd been of that generation, the Beatles and the Summer of Love. We hated the war, and Nixon and his President Johnson, who did just dreadful mistakes. It's a tragedy. 6 million people were affected by the Vietnam War. Either they died, or they were brutalized, or they were maimed, or they had suffered things like Agent Orange, which still to this day affects the population. And to go to Saigon and to meet the young people there, and then to meet some of the survivors of the Viet Cong taking over. I had a really dramatic, I don't know if you want to go into it, Phil, but I had this really wonderful, it was one of the most extraordinary experiences, if you'd like me to talk about it, because we'd done the Cheney tunnels during the day, which are this incredible complex of tunnels which had hospitals in them, very basic, put under the ground because the Americans couldn't bomb them. So the Viet Cong had come down from the North Vietnam and they'd gone into Cambodia and Laos, and then they camped outside of Saigon. When they were bombed to obliteration, they dug tunnels and they lived like rats. They were the tunnel rats. They lived under the ground, then they came out, threw a few grenades, shot a few, and then went back in. So we did that during the day, and it was hot. And I got to handle an AK-47. I got to fire an AK-47, fire an M1 Combine, just to get the brute force of that violence. So it was an incredible experience. But it's 30 degrees and very humid, and you'd had enough. And we had this tour guide, and I would so strongly recommend people hire a tour guide when they go to big sites like Angkor Wat or Saigon or wherever, Chiang Mai in northern Thailand. Because they know it. It's in their life. And there was this young girl called Mai, and she was very staunch and very strong, in what had happened against the Americans. They don't like the Americans, so they welcome them now. Why would you? It's like a history, a poisoned history, like Irish history with the, imperialism. And and she understood that I had this sort of love affair with the American Saigon vibe. So we said our goodbyes, and then suddenly I got a call about an hour later. I was about to just crash, and she said, "Okay, come on down." And she had a scooter there, and she said, "Get on the scooter." Now, have you been to Saigon?
No, I haven't actually been
Well,
to Vietnam.
it is the most insane place to get on a scooter I have ever seen. It is like a chaos. It's like the Caledron Collider in Switzerland, all of these things coming together, like how there is not mass death on the roads. So I got on the back of her scooter and off we went. And she took me to the building, which was the Black Ops building. There's a very famous, iconic photo in 1975 of the Americans were chased out of Saigon. And all of these poor South Vietnamese people who'd worked for the government, the US government, were now in fear of their lives as the communist army came down and was camped outside of the center of Saigon. And the last choppers were sort of coming in to pick up tens of thousands. They only picked up a few. And there's this iconic photo of this hotel on this building, a Black Ops building of the CIA, where the chopper comes down and there's a ladder and there's people going up the ladder with their little pathetic belongings, trying to get on the last chopper out. And so she said, "We're going to that building." So we drove and we got through all of this madness and arrived. And it was an old apartment block, which had been used by the CIA as their dark ops building, apparently. And it wasn't on the map. It wasn't on any tourist maps. So she sort of gave a few bob to the guy downstairs, and we went up and we caught a lift, and we had to sort of clamber over stuff because it was all disused and it was in a bad state of repair. And then sure enough, there was a ladder and there was a little roof right up, and they were way above Saigon. And she said, "That's it. That's not the same ladder, but that's the ladder. We're here." And so I had to sort of, I'm a bit, I don't like heights, but I just said, "Okay, we're doing this." And I put my foot up, got to the top, looked over, the tarmac macadam top, no bigger than this room. And I thought, okay, and I somehow got myself on and stood quaking. And you could look all around, and the wind was blowing, and modern Saigon was there. There was this moment of, I'd actually done this, I'm here. You could almost like feel history. You could almost see like this quantum little envelope opening where you're back. And nobody goes there. I don't know why. It's not, and it's sort of, it was not in a great state of, it wouldn't have passed health and safety. So she came up as well, and we took some photographs and made a great podcast and made our way down. And then she said, "Okay, well, that's not it. We're going to go to where the Americans used to hang out. And so we got back on the scooter and two of her friends joined, and we ended up in a place, a famous street where all the GIs were housed. And this was this was like Deer Hunter, Apocalypse Now territory. The great movies, the Robert De Niro's, the Marlon Brando's, the madness of what the Americans did and how it affected their lives. And we sat down there and we ate. And this woman had a restaurant, and the restaurant also acted as a garage. She made money from bikes being parked while the locals went off. And there was something about that. It cost like $2 for the meal and a beer, and talking to these incredibly educated young Vietnamese people about they wanted to leave, they wanted to go here, they wanted to do this. They were really interested to meet someone, of my vintage from, the West, if you like. And I thought, what a privilege. I've just been in history. I've actually been on the page as much as anybody can be.
Oh.
I've actually made my own little bit of history.
Like that photo is one of the most famous photos, the one with the helicopter, and it's I thought that was the US. I assumed it was the US Embassy. I didn't realize.
No, it's the US Embassy is a stone's throw away. It was a different thing, and so for me that made the trip. That was enough to make, you can go to Halong Bay, you can do blah blah blah, but that sort of nitty gritty get down and then meet the locals, and then it was so bizarre because I discovered this wine bar the night before. Now, this is a communist state, very strict communist state. But Saigon always kept this American sort of mad vibe, and they don't like the communists. The Saigonese do not like. They want nothing to do with the communism. So this guy I met, he knew he'd been to Middleton in Ireland. He'd been to all of the Scottish breweries. He had this list of wines and champagnes and Chateau Margaux and thousands of dollars. And then a huge Lamborghini arrived, and this guy got out with his girlfriends. And I just thought it was so wonderful because, you can put, the communists won, but they didn't win the hearts of the South Vietnamese. And the South Vietnamese now, like the Chinese, have some of the richest people on the planet because they're entrepreneurial. And they'll do their thing. And so it was a mad day. That was from the Cheney tunnels to the Black Op building to Lamborghinis and the really great gin and tonic. Gin made in the Mekong Delta with lemongrass.
Oh, wow. And you describe like kind of the street food. I used to spend a lot of time, so 6 months in Southeast Asia. And Bangkok was always our base. We'd go back. So we got to know it very well. And, like eating on a street with, and having a little plastic bag with your smoothies, drinking through a straw. But that's the key. Or having a Chang beer, sitting on a little stool, and that's the magic of it, isn't it?
It is. And it's so weird talking about street food. I have ate street food in Malaysia. I've ate durian in Singapore. I've been in Penang, where you can get the most extraordinary dishes, and Saigon and Bangkok. All of them have incredible, and I have never once got sick. And you pay nothing for the food for the most part. And it takes depending on the strength of the spice, it can take your head off. But it's so wonderful. And you just look for locals. As I say, look for locals who are eating there. You'll be safe. India would be the one place I wouldn't. That's the only place. When I was recently in India, you can. It's for some reason, I don't know. I'd be more careful.
Yeah.
But in Asia, not a problem.
And it's, the other thing I love about Asia, particularly Luang Prabang and Phnom Penh. Actually, I love that French colonial architecture.
Yeah.
I always say the French, they did colonialism well. They went to the great spots. I always say, like, if I arrive somewhere and it's like French colonial, I go, right, this is going to be a good spot.
Yes. Yeah. Well, they ruined the places and then they left nice buildings.
Yeah, but bar that part. But then, you know what I mean? But like just say in Laos, like, like in Luang Prabang, it's even, that like you get lovely French bread and the French food, and it's quite magical, isn't it?
No, it is. It's like Goa. Goa is this weird place in India, well known to the hippies because it was a Portuguese colony, and it was the only state in India that wasn't run by the Brits and the colonial empire. It was a Portuguese empire, so there's a different vibe there. But it's the same thing, it's this amalgamation of the old and the new.
So I could have you here all day. So I'm not, I would recommend people to go to your podcast, to listen to your stories and keep them coming because you really bring things alive. But I was just curious then, if there was one place that you would recommend out of all your travels. It has to be the first place comes to your head because you could be.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't, I can't ever go beyond. Well, I'll say two if I may. One short haul and one long haul.
Yeah.
Long haul, go to Angkor Wat. You may hate me, you may curse me, you may write back and say, Kevin, that was a real bum deal.
Well, you couldn't have
I was sweaty and it was hot and there was ants and there was malaria and so on. I just think it is the most jaw-dropping. I just got the experience of my life there. The other place to go is I think it's Venice. And Venice is there's two places. I do the first day in Venice and the second day in St. Peter's. And I think you'll meet heaven and beauty. Venice, it was my first school trip. It was my first experience abroad. I don't think you can beat it. I've been there, as a student. I've been there as a lover. I've been there as a father. I've been there as a grandfather. It's endlessly. If I did have a sudden magnificent inflow of money, I would so love to have a place, but you don't really need a place there. I have friends who actually have a house there, but it's so there's something about Venice that you really need to see it before you leave this planet. And the same goes for Rome. There's something, as I said in that podcast with my mother, I took my mother, she never wanted to go to Rome. She said, "Oh, see Rome and die." And there is something about there because we saw Rome with her and just the magnificence, whether you believe in Catholicism or deity or anything, it's just magnificently crazy. I mean, Rome is like a U2 concert. It's like big theater on the biggest stage with the biggest, the biggest. I take it like that. It's just fabulous.
That's why I'd always put kind of Italy before, say, France. That I love that bit of madness that Italy has.
Yes. That's why it produced, like people give out about the Italians, and they're sort of chaotic, but it produced a Renaissance, they produced Michelangelo and Leonardo, and
exactly,
and, like some of the greatest art and greatest movements. And
just my last question, actually, I know I keep saying last question about 10 times, but I loved your other one as well, actually, about Lake Garda. That's a spot I haven't been to, and I'm dying to go to. So where is the best airport to go to? You mentioned a couple, like you mentioned Venice, Milan, Turin. Where would be the closest, or which one would you recommend to go to Lake Garda?
And go to Verona.
Verona.
And it's a 2-hour coach drive, and stay a night in Verona and see Verona. Verona's a wonderful place, and you've got the opera, the open air theatre, the old Roman theatre. You've got the fake balcony of Juliet, which isn't Juliet's balcony, but but then you get to Lake Garda, and there's something about Lake Garda. As I had the privilege of just being there, just myself. The two grandkids are 9, 7, and 8 or 9, and quite well behaved. And they there was something about the Lake Garda is all about where the mountains meet the water, and you never get away from that. So you've got this incredible backdrop of, the mountains and the water, and the water has, and then the sky above, which is ever changing because you can have spectacular thunderstorms. You can have these beautiful clear blue days. You get the two different winds affect Lake Garda. You have one come up and then it turns in the afternoon. That's why it's, abseilers and all the water sports are so popular there, because you get these different winds that really, are just like, they're like cocaine for people who want to go on all those different water sport activities that involved the wind. And then you have these wonderful ferries, and we've got this map of different boats and different sizes all coming, and they disgorge their fans, and you can sit we were in Lumine, which is wonderful, beautiful town, which has lemon groves in the little local shops and the smell of lemon in the air. And you look at the tourists and you don't do anything other than just be entertained. Like it's what more can you ask for? Just to be entertained by beauty and life and look at shops and look at people and have a gelato, have an ice cream, have a beer, have a, a spritzer.
I thank you so much for this. I really would so recommend people the top travel destinations, Kevin Flanagan. They're lovely bite-sized episodes and you bring places alive. So thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you, Fergal, it's been just a pleasure. It's a pleasure to talk. It's a pleasure to meet another wandering spirit who loves travel and can bring 4 kids with him. Now that's an achievement.
Yeah. Well, my trick is I'm trying to train them in, and I think we've succeeded to the level now where they go, right, where are we going this year? Because like even this year, I said we were in Calcan, and I'm like, God, we could go because there was a place beside Calcan, which I thought was even cooler. But I kind of went for the bigger town with the busy bars for the kids. But the next town is like a little, it's the dive center for Turkey, really gorgeous. And I'd love to go back there. But the kids are like, oh no, where's new? Where are we going? So I've trained them in well, they know, because my line is always like, the world is so big. We always say, would you come back here? But we never do.
But very good. You're doing such a great job, and I hope I've done that with not so with my son, and then particularly with the grandkids, because I've had opportunities with them when I've been like had more time and a little bit of money to be able to take them places, and I think what a gift to give to someone. Like the gifts I gave my grandkids really was how to ski, and I started learning in my 50s. It's never too late. I started learning well into my 50s, and I'm a good skier now, but nobody else was ever interested. So I said, when Kuba, my grandson, was 4, I said, okay, you're going, and we turned it into a story. And then his sister Maya came, and they're both now really good skiers, and they leave me behind. I'm just gone. I can hardly go down the beginner slope with them now. But I'm so happy, to leave that. So, when I've shuffled on, whenever that is, and who knows, we don't know when we're going to shuffle on, who's going to go first, but at least it's something, to give them.
And do you know what, Mark Twain, I think he had a line about people who travel. He said, you never meet a xenophobic, racist person that travels a lot. Do you know what I mean? So, do you know what I mean? It's not just you're giving them like the love of travel, but if you're into travel, you're generally an open mind. As you said, that the Pol Pot would have hated us. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. And just one final thing, just to looking at that, because when I was in Nuremberg recently, and because my father fought in the war, because I was brought up in the UK, and he was in the merchant navy, and he fought Hitler, and so I went to Nuremberg, and I went down to, again, just nobody else wanted to go. I went down to the Zeppelin field. And the Zeppelin field is where Leni Riefenstahl did the Power of Will, which is these incredible, talk about the Vatican, talk about U2. These were just huge. These where Hitler took the blood oaths from his troops, and you saw these incredible pictures of him up on the stand, and that stand is still there, and you can stand in front of it. The Allies couldn't blow it up. It was made of too strong concrete. They turned it into a car park, and now they have pop concerts there, which is pretty bizarre. But I stood there and looked at this and sort of got this sense of Hitler. And then you go on and you go to somewhere like Auschwitz, and you see what happens when someone mesmerizes a population. Because Hitler was doing the Zeppelin field in Nuremberg in the 30s, the early 30s, all the way through to 37, I think, or 38. And he was literally turning people, these cultured Germans, into what turned out to be killers on a mass scale. And then you go then to Auschwitz, and you see the end, you see the cycle, you see the end result. And it's the same when you go to somewhere like you go to Saigon, and you go to Cambodia, and you see from what what happens when it goes out of control. And there's the lesson, I think. So that's this, that's the really serious side of traveling, is seeing those cycles. But then you have to have the skiing as well, and the fun with the grandkids, and party time.
Exactly.
Everything.
So listen, yeah, it covers all angles. So listen, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
I'd ask you to subscribe or follow wherever you listen to your podcasts, and you'll be the first to know whenever a new episode is coming out. I'd also ask you to follow me on Travel Tales with Fergal on Instagram, and you'll get updates on what's coming next. And if you did enjoy the episode, I'd encourage you to rate and review the episode, as it helps other people to find this series. Take care and safe travels.